Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. You guys able to hear me? Hello there. Can I get some idea of who's in here right now? Can you guys type what your actual names are so I can see who you are? Okay, very good. Josh, welcome. Josh Kwiat, hello. Anike Kashi, hello. Michael, yeah. Well, if your name's, I only need your name if it's not the same as your thing. Obviously, if your name is the same, but I wouldn't know who Cat Demon Productions is if it didn't say he was Josh. So if your name is the same as your thing, you're fine. Just waiting for some folks to join up here. Right now we got 7 people, but maybe there will be a few more. Hopefully there'll be a few more. I was hoping to get more than 6 of you in here today, or 7. If we don't, that's okay too, I guess. Close that one, close that one, close that one. We still only have 6 people in here. I'll give it 2 more minutes, but then we're going to get started because I got some stuff I want to talk about, and then we're going to discuss the lesson for today, which is just basically going to be some review of some concepts, but I'm going to give you some direction on where things are going here coming up. Well, folks, I think I'm going to get started here. So, I was kind of hoping that we would have more than 6 people join us today, but that's okay. I'll just talk to you about what I want to talk about, and this is not going to go on for hours and hours and hours. I'm going to give you some essential stuff. It'll probably take me about an hour to get through things to get today, and this video will be available on my YouTube channel for you guys to go back and watch later. If you have other questions or forget what I say or something like that, the lecture will stay on YouTube and will stay linked on Schoology as well, so you'll be able to go back and watch it whenever you like. I'm choosing to do all of my instruction via YouTube Live versus Zoom for a few different reasons, but mostly the reason being that I prefer the interaction to just be one way. I understand that Zoom offers some certain things that, some teachers have enjoyed utilizing or whatever, but just for the sake of appropriateness, and I think for the sake of privacy and other things like that, I think it's better just to have one-sided instruction. So you're going to basically just be seeing me. If you have questions, you're of course welcome to ask them in the little bar, and I will address whatever questions are asked during this live lecture. I wanted to start off today by talking about a few things about the direction of well, first of all, where we're at, but then the direction of where we're going. So here's where things are at. I have been doing distance instruction for both my college class and for the AP European History classes now for a while. I have not been doing instruction for my one section of Regular World, which is you guys, and I have not been doing online instruction for my AP Research class because it's just not really conducive to online instruction. They're all doing independent work on different projects, so I've had communications with those students, but this is the first time that I've actually addressed the Regular World class. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what's going to happen here. Few things. First of all, I have had a whole lot of people in the time that they have had off trying to use the time to catch up on late work, which I think is really good, and I'm very proud of you for doing the work and so on. Unfortunately, due to the nature of how this closure has affected things, I don't have access to my classroom. And so for certain assignments, particularly test corrections assignments, anything to do with a missed exam, anything to do with tests in general, I am pretty much not going to be able to handle. So test corrections, tests, and so on. There are some other missing work too, just depending on things that I also don't have access to because I don't have programs to open things up on my computer at home and so on. So here's my suggestion about late and missing work. I was to be honest with you, I was pretty proud of myself this year because I was really keeping on top of late and missing work in terms of not letting it pile up. I was really being diligent about adding late and missing work very frequently. So by the time that we got dismissed, most of the late and missing work that I had been given, with the exception of maybe I'll say about 5 or 6 assignments between all of my classes, were added. And so anything that's been done in the meantime, I probably either haven't added it, haven't seen it, or whatever. Hi, Madison. Just to let you know, Madison, this is for regular world, okay, not for AP Euro. I already finished the AP Euro instruction for this morning. That was at 8 a.m. This is for the regular world kids. So late and missing work, at this point, I would prefer if you just stopped doing it, to be honest with you. And the reason that I prefer that you stop doing it is because it's just really, 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 really hard for me to stay organized with no, it's all done remotely. And so everything that I do, it's just like clutching at straws in every single direction when I have individual students emailing me, messaging me, parents messaging me, and so on. It's just an organizational nightmare. It's really, really, really hard to stay on top of late work because there's only about 50 million kids who have all sorts of different issues that they need, and addressing each one of them individually is really, really difficult. And so just stop doing late work. The only work that I'm going to be accepting from here on out is going to be the online stuff that we do from here until the end of the school year. Now, the good news is that the online distance instruction assignments that we're going to be doing here online will have the potential to increase your grade. Basically, the way that this is going to work is that every single time I do an online lesson, which will be on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m., I will be having an assignment that you can do along with this online lecture. Now, you don't necessarily need the lecture to do the assignment, but it will help. And each assignment is going to be worth 5 points. Now, I'm not saying that all the assignments are going to be the same in difficulty. I'm going to try and keep them the same in difficulty, but I'm also going to try and make it so that it's not the same assignment every time. So, for example, maybe sometimes it'll be like defining some vocab words, or maybe sometimes it'll be answering some questions related to a video, or maybe sometimes it'll be some practice test questions or something like that. The assignment won't be the same every time. What will be the same every time is that it'll be 5 points every time, and you will only have 48 hours to complete it from the time that I do the assignment. So in other words, today's assignment is going to be due at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. If you don't finish it by 10 a.m. on Wednesday, there will be no late work. There will be no, oh, I submitted it late. It'll just not get added. Okay? Now, if you don't do the assignment, it doesn't count against you. One of the things that the school has dictated is that your grades are not able to fall below where they were at the quarter 3 mark. What that means is that your grade has the potential to go up for every 5-point extra credit assignment that you do, but it will not go down for not participating in any of the online instruction either. For those of you that are missing a lot of online work, or missing work from before we left for this COVID virus break or whatever you want to call it, this will mean that the more that you do, the better your chances of your grade improving go up. The less that you do, the more your grade will stay the same as what it was when you left school. So this is how things are going to go from here to the end of the school year, and of course I remain available at all times through Schoology. I have been since the start. If you've sent me messages or emails, there have been times where I haven't had a response, so I haven't gotten back to people because there were times where, especially early on in the break, where people were emailing me, how do we do this, how do we do that? I didn't know, so I didn't really have a response at that point. But that's why I'm taking the first part of this lesson today to explain to you guys everything that I do know and the direction of where things are going from here on out. So that is the story there. Questions so far at this point for what's going to be going on? I'm on a little bit of a delay, so when I say things, you guys actually don't hear them for about 20 or 30 seconds after I say them. So I'm going to take a brief pause here to have a sip of coffee and then wait to see if there's any questions that folks have about how everything is going to happen. Oh, one last thing I'll say is that the online videos and lessons will be available even if you don't tune in live. That doesn't mean that you have excluded yourself from being able to do the online lesson. It just means that you have to be diligent about using your own time then to go on and check it out. So for example, if you have another teacher who's doing something at 10 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you're having a difficult time choosing, the good news is that if you don't tune in live here, you can still tune in after the fact, watch the video back, and then still do the assignment by the time that the next video goes up, let's say, for example, on Wednesday or whatever. Are you still going to grading the 1917 movie extra credit? Short answer is I would love to do that if I had them. They were printed out and brought into school, and so because they were printed out and brought into school, I don't have them. They are sitting in the late work basket at school still. So short answer on that right now is no. Unless I can go into the school and grab some materials and stuff, which they've opened the school for a couple hours at a time here and there. Since the closure, I have gone back to the school once or twice, but the extra credit assignments were not at the top of my list at that point. I'm going to say probably no on that, to be honest with you. And the reason is because essentially everything that you're doing from this point forward counts as extra credit, basically. So that's I mean, you're going to have everything that we do from here on out is going to be extra credit. So there's really no need for the 1917 extra credit assignments because your grade can't go down from where it was. It can only go up. So that's the answer on that. All right, folks. Well, any other questions? If not, I'm going to go ahead and get started on the other things that we have to do. So, to bring you back to where we were when we left off. The last thing that we did in class was we were in the interwar years. We were in the time period between World War I and World War II. And I wanted to take some time to go into some detail about that and do some review about totalitarianism and what totalitarianism is, what we see, the political changes that we see happening. And the last thing that we actually did was we were watching like a made-for-TV docu-series, 2-part docu-series on the rise of Hitler in Germany. And so actually the second, the part of today's assignment, today's assignment is going to be really straightforward, actually. It's finishing up the thing that we were in the middle of when we left for the COVID virus. And so today's assignment is going to be pretty straightforward. After today's video, where I spend the next however long, probably about 45 minutes or so, talking to you guys about reviewing concepts from the interwar years, the assignment for today will be to watch the second episode of the Rise of Hitler docuseries that we had started in class before we left, and then to complete the assignment that is online and submit that on Schoology, okay? And I will be giving you until Wednesday to do that. So the video is about, I don't know, 90 minutes or something like that. And so you watch the second episode of it. I think it's about 90 minutes. And then you simply finish the assignment, which presumably you may have already even started when you first started watching the video last class. So hopefully you're already like halfway done with it. That would be great. And then you just turn it in to the assignment submission thing on Schoology, and I will add it at the end of the week. So that's how the grading is going to go. Is I will update grades once a week. I just got done doing them yesterday for my AP Euro classes. So they already have one full week's worth of distance instruction assignments that have been added to the grades. And at every time that you do one, adds 5 points. That's the potential for every week, basically 15 extra credit points. So 2 weeks, that's 30. 3 weeks, that's 45. 4 weeks, that's already 60 points of extra credit, essentially, which is pretty substantial in my view. So every little thing that you do helps, and I hope that this incentivizes you to, value your education and put some time and effort into maybe learning a thing or two while you have the time on this extended break that we're on. So let's take some time to review totalitarianism at this point. I'm going to start talking a little bit about the conditions in Europe and some of the things that we're going to review some concepts, and we're also going to be talking about some new concepts today. The video will just stay focused on me. I'm not going to switch it over to my desktop. I'm basically just going to be doing about a 45-minute review lecture right now for you to make sure that you understand where we're at in history and hopefully set up the Hitler docuseries that we started watching again a little bit in case you forgot what that was all about and kind of Hitler's path to power in Germany. So I do have some notes that I'm going to be kind of reading off the screen here, but let's see here. Let me widen this out a bit. Let me open it up here. I have to do this in a new screen here. Okay. So, totalitarianism. Let's just spend some time talking about totalitarianism. Remember that totalitarianism is where people are expected to actively participate in the system and support the regime that gets established. Okay, totalitarianism is different than previous times, because in previous times where you had, like, say, a Tsar in power in Russia, like, say, Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar that we talked about, who was kind of like a control freak during the First World War, and he was really a brutal dictator. But the thing that makes a dictator like a Tsar different from, say, a totalitarian dictator is that popular participation in government is forbidden under a Tsar. There is no participation in government where regimes of old kind of absolutist style monarchies in Europe were trying to prevent major changes from undermining the existing social order at that time. Now, this is very different from totalitarianism, because totalitarianism is where the governmental regime expects people to participate in the system and actively support the regime. So take, for example, Stalin had enacted that 5-year plan in Russia. We talked about Stalin's 5-year plans. And what he did with those 2 5-year plans was he was expecting people to participate in the economy to rapidly industrialize Russia. Okay? So that would be one example. Also, the Hitler Youth in Germany would be another great example of how totalitarian Nazi regime expected the participation and support of the population of the government. It's 100% forced support of the government. Whether you like the Nazis or not, they would enact these totalitarian policies that would force the people to participate and to support the government. Okay. Also, you could talk about the Blackshirts in Italy, which was kind of the young fascists of Italy who, under Mussolini, were expected to participate in nationalistic sort of things. Also, I think that there was a German, like Girls Bund, like a group for girls that's that they were taught how to become good, like to raise their kids to become good Nazis and other things like that. So these are the kinds of policies that are put in place. Also, in a totalitarian regime, you see complete control of both public and private life, right? Public and private life. So that would include things like newspapers or magazines or other associations. A lot of times in totalitarian regimes, there's even state control of religious institutions. So you cut down. Totalitarianism cuts into people's personal freedoms big time. There really is no all spheres of life are controlled by the government. Now, new technologies actually assist in helping to create these totalitarian-style regimes that we see rise in Europe. Now, why do they rise? We're going to talk about the technology in a second, but why do these new totalitarian regimes rise in the first place? Well, one of the things that we talked about in class was how during the interwar years, after World War I, it is an age of serious anxiety. People have a lot of trepidation about the meaning of life at this time. They're looking at the global economy after World War I in Europe, and they're saying, man, things are looking pretty scary right now. Excuse me. And things are looking pretty scary right now. Then, shortly thereafter, the stock market crashes. So in 1929, 10 years after the end of World War I, people find themselves right back at the drawing board again after a little bit of time of a short period of economic growth during the mid-20s and recovery during the mid-20s after World War I. Then all of a sudden everything comes crashing back down again when the stock market crashes in 1929, triggering Great Depression. So totalitarianism, how does that come out of the trepidation, the fear that these people are having at that time? Well, what you'll find is when populations are really scared, when populations feel really fearful or uncertain, a lot of times what populations will do is they'll look to a governmental type figure, or even sometimes in older times a religious type figure, to take control. They look for, if you will, the top dog or the pack leader. Okay, because humans are, very social creatures. We look for the person in charge to take control of the situation and smooth things over. So when populations start to feel fearful is when they start to turn towards more dictatorial styles of government to rein in control. And that's what totalitarianism is really at the root of it all about, is establishing control in a time where people feel like things are kind of chaotic. Now, we also talked about a lot of different changes that happened during the interwar years with respect to art. So we saw new styles of art coming about during this time. Cubism, Surrealism, Dada art, Art Deco visual style. We talked about all of those. We also saw new ideas in not just technology, but in math and physics. And we saw new ideas in philosophy. And we saw new ideas in literature. So as much as this time is a period of great fear and uncertainty and anxiety in a lot of ways, it's also a time where people are exploring brand new avenues of creativity and trying to make sense of a world that seemingly doesn't make a whole lot of sense anymore. Keep in mind that World War I was one of these events in human history that really caused people to take a step back and ask, who are we? And what do we believe in? And are we as rational as we thought we were? Because rational in World War I really don't seem to make sense in the same sentence. new technology comes about during this time, new advancements in technology. And the thing that's so interesting about that is how this new technology is then immediately utilized by the very same totalitarian leaders who are coming to power during this time in order to further establish their dominance or assert their control over society and over government. So think about this: radios, automobiles, airplanes, telephones. These are the sorts of even film, okay, movies, okay. These sorts of technologies are utilized by guys like Hitler. Okay, maybe to a lesser extent Stalin, but Hitler in particular was a master of propaganda. And so governments can now wiretap people's phones, for example. They can spy more easily on suspected people using radios. Okay, you can also communicate across longer distances more immediately than in a previous era, which would have necessitated that a person send either a telegraph, which would have been a Morse code statement over a line, or even in a time before that where you were relying on things like writing letters and stuff like that. So nowadays with telephones, in the middle of the years between World War I and II, people have telephones. And so you can communicate immediately very important information over long distances. And this is a way, too, of helping to control the flow of information. Radio is used in a brand new way because we see radio used not just for music, not just for entertainment, but to spread propaganda. And by the way, it's still used to spread propaganda even to this day, and so is TV, and so is the internet. Okay, so propaganda is something that's been a trait of human history going back to the dawn of technology, of radio technology for sure, but even long before that, propaganda has been used in the form of posters and art and music and other things like that. So radio becomes an effective tool for propaganda, in addition to the traditional printed media forms of propaganda that they used to use even before that. Automobiles and trucks give these regimes, these totalitarian regimes, more mobility. Because what we're seeing now is with the expanse of technology with relation to transportation, people can get around much more quickly. You can also fly from location to location. So totalitarianism finds itself in a way even further bolstered by the technology advancements that are coming out of this time. The classic tools of totalitarian regimes are censorship, which means controlling the media and not allowing certain messages to get through the media, or controlling the message that's being sent through the media. Indoctrination, taking young folks in particular and indoctrinating them into a particular, and I use the word indoctrination deliberately, not brainwash per se, but indoctrinate, raise people into a particular line of political or economic thought. And then terror, of course. They utilize fear, because one of the best ways to instill control is to keep the population in a perpetual state of chaos. Because if the totalitarian regime can on one hand, they're trying to institute control, but the way that they institute control is by continuing to use terror to keep the population petrified, so that they feel the need to have a totalitarian government to bring peace and stability. Virtually no freedom of the press. Education is geared towards creating loyal citizens, and failure to comply with the government is often met with either physical punishment, imprisonment in, say, for example, in Russia, they had the gulags where they would send people off to Siberia to spend the rest of their days chopping down trees, or in the worst case scenario, they may even end up putting you to death. Totalitarian regimes in this time are either going to be fascist or communist. Hitler fascist, Mussolini fascist, Stalin communist. What's the difference between those two? Let's just take a quick review of these two ideas. Remember, communism is more economically based. Fascism is more nationalism based. So when we talk about nationalism, we're talking about extremely conservative far right, far right principles that are all about glorification of the state, but also a single party rule where you've got like the fascist nationalist party. So in Germany, that was the Nazi party, the NSDAP. They condemn democracy. They promote aggressive nationalism. They advocate for social Darwinism, which is the idea that strong states conquer weak states. Strong states survive, weak states die off, so they want to create a strong state. One thing that they do not want to do, though, in a fascist regime is to create a classless society. They want to have class distinctions, In a fascist state, they are not trying to make everyone equal. They, in fact, believe quite the opposite. They believe that there are very, even genetically based, or in their view, eugenics-based, bloodline-related deficiencies. So people who had mental illnesses, for example, were treated very cruelly in fascist states like Germany at this time. People who had any sort of emotional, physical deformity, physical, emotional, or mental abnormality is maybe a better way of saying it, was considered a burden to the state. Also, it went for people like let's see here, like homosexual folks were treated very badly. Communists were treated terribly in fascist states. And then, of course, you've got the whole racial side where Jewish folks, the Romani folks, and so on were treated very, very badly as well, because they're seen as bloodline less like inferior, right? They're not as good, they're not as pure of bloodlines, quote unquote, as the German, quote unquote, bloodline was. And of course, all of this is mixed up in a bunch of fake pseudosciences and so on that really have no bearing on any sort of facts pertaining to genetics or anything like that. But it doesn't stop the fact that this is what they believed back in that time. So fascism is a very cutthroat, very brutal, very self-aggrandizing, nationalist, pat yourself on the back sort of political philosophy. But it certainly doesn't try to make everyone economically equal. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because that's basically the big difference between fascism and communism. See, in a communist totalitarian state, although it's every bit as totalitarian as fascism is in terms of controlling the media and using fear and so on, and indoctrination and so on, the principle behind it is completely different. In a communist state, the idea is that they're using the idea that the working class, the farmers and the laborers, would somehow be able to establish a dictatorship of what they called proletariat, where everyone would be equal and share in society equally and evenly and use only according to their need. It's a very idealistic society that they're trying to create. Think about communism as trying to create a perfect society out of imperfect people. You have people who are self-inclined. You have people who are sometimes not very nice. You have people who are a little bit ruthless. You have people who are self-interested and don't really care that much about others. And you're trying to take people like that and put them into a society where everybody magically gets along with one another and shares according to need and tries to create this perfectionistic style of state where everybody is equal. Well, unfortunately, as we've seen in a lot of these types of scenarios, everybody is equal in communism, but they are equally poor, meaning that when they share in the wealth, they are all sharing in a pittance of wealth between them, and everybody is living comparatively probably even worse off than they were in the times previous to the rise of Stalin in Russia in about 1924 or so. So the spread of communism would probably be a bigger threat over time. After World War II, we see the death of fascism, but communism tends to be a lingering threat after World War II, where we see communism spread to places like even quite close by, like Cuba and so on. the economy is centralized in a communist party situation. The entire government runs the economy. That's another major distinction between communist-style regimes and fascist-style regimes. In a fascist regime, you do see some government control of the economy, but it's more privatized than it is in a communist-style economy. They still have private companies, but people are expected in a fascist regime, they're expected to buy German products, as opposed to, say, buying like somewhere outside of Germany. The Nazis were all about spending money within Germany to help the Germans out and make the German economy better and improve German industries and industrialization. In the communist society of Russia or the Soviet Union under Stalin, the entire economy is run by the state. So there's no private companies. All of the economy is completely regulated by state industries for the most part. So that's another major difference between the two. I'm going to take a quick brief pause here to make sure that I'm not missing out on any questions from people. Karan, hey, welcome. You're here. We still only have 8 people in here, but that's okay. That's not a big deal. I'm going to jump back over here and keep talking about certain things. Let's see here. Okay. So you might think that like Marxism is more benevolent, like communism is somehow more benevolent than fascism, like because they're trying to make everybody equal, but it's really not. In reality, it's every bit as brutal, sometimes even worse than fascism. Neither of these systems are good forms of government that any of you would want to live under. It's extremely rigid and very ruthless. And stepping even a little bit out of line, even just being suspected of stepping out of line in either Nazi Germany or in Stalinist Soviet Union Russia would have resulted most likely in something very bad happening to you. So anyhow, that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of those sorts of things. We talked about the 5-year plan, we talked about that. Let's talk about Benito Mussolini a little bit. He rose to power in Italy actually, he started off as a socialist, as a communist, which is really interesting because fascists and communists really don't get along at all, despite how similar they are in terms of how they run a brutally totalitarian state. The thing that's so interesting about them is that they are politically exact opposites of one another. Fascists are going to be super, super far right conservative nationalists. Communists are going to be super, super far left communist radicals. And so they're on opposite sides of the political spectrum. But the thing that's funny is that the further away you move from the middle, the less democratic, the less free things become, and the more totalitarian things become on either side, despite the fact that they are on opposite sides. So Benito Mussolini organized a fascist party in Italy, which kind of combines some aspects of socialism and nationalism, which, by the way, is exactly what Hitler does in Germany as well when he establishes the National Socialist Party, but it is more fascist than it is socialist. The socialist side of things is only for the sake of taking state control of certain things. Territorial expansion, benefits for workers, land reform, and so on. The party was named after something called the fasces, which is like a bundle of sticks around an axe. The idea being that a single twig is really easy to break, but when you bundle all those sticks together, their unity makes them more difficult to break. And that's the idea behind nationalism, is that if everybody is united under a certain national identity, they become stronger and operate as one. In 1920, Mussolini gained support of the conservative classes in Italy and frightened the middle class for his anti-socialist rhetoric, and abandoned his more socialist programs at that point. He established something called the Blackshirts. I mentioned them earlier. It was a paramilitary force that basically attacks anyone who's communist, socialist, or otherwise considered an enemy of Benito Mussolini's fascist nationalist program. He wants to restore Italy to the glory of the Roman Empire. That's one of his main goals. And so in October of 1922, this is a good 10 years before Hitler comes to power in Germany, he does a march on Rome, and this led to Mussolini taking power, and he demanded the resignation of the existing government and his own appointment by the king. So in Italy in the early 20s, the government collapsed. Mussolini received the right to organize a brand new government, and the king at that time, who was a guy called Victor Emmanuel III, gave him dictatorial powers for 1 year to end the nation's social unrest and chaos that was going on while all of this was happening, in no small part thanks to the chaos stirred up by Mussolini himself. The corporate state gets established at this time. The idea of the corporate state is that everything that's done economically in the state is done to glorify or expand the state's power. Everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. They want people buying German products. They want people wearing German products. They want people using German products. They want people working in German industries, and so on. They don't want any outside stuff influencing their economy. It's a very, very domestic economic plan where they're trying to stress at-home production, at-home consumption, at-home employment, keeping the money of, in this case, Italy inside Italy, or in Germany inside Germany, or wherever a fascist state is created. So Mussolini creates a dictatorship. He essentially eliminates the right to vote in Italy. The government gets ruled by his personal decrees. But Italy never becomes the true totalitarian regime that the Nazi regime becomes. Even though we say that Mussolini is a totalitarian dictator and a fascist leader and so on, the degree to which Mussolini has control is never the same extent that, say, Hitler has in Germany. Mussolini never becomes all-powerful. There's still an old power structure in Italy at this time of conservatives and high-ranking military figures, and even the church has some high-ranking members that are still highly influential in the early 1900s. And so Mussolini, unlike Hitler and more so unlike Stalin, never decides to try to purge the conservative classes. Both Hitler and Stalin are much more deliberate in their efforts to rid themselves of political competition and social competition. So they do a lot of purging, meaning getting rid of people who were either an immediate or a potential threat to their power down the line. Okay, the rise of Hitler. Now, this is really where I wanted to get to today. I'm going to spend some time talking about the rise of Hitler and talking a little bit more about setting things up for completing the rest of that docuseries assignment. Now, before I get to Hitler, I do want to mention a couple of things. For all of their faults, and as terrible as totalitarian regimes are, it's not that they don't do anything. There are some limited successes economically, in particular, under both Mussolini and Hitler. I wanted to mention, to give fair credit to Mussolini and some of the accomplishments that he achieves during his reign or rule. Internal improvements. Italy under Mussolini, to their credit, does introduce electricity on a wide scale and builds a whole lot of roads, particularly like freeways or highway systems. They have more efficient city governments that they established during this time. They do limit the influence of the mafia. They suppress the mafia, which was particularly strong in southern Italy and in Sicily, which is an island off the coast of Italy. And then they do improvements of the justice system, except for in the case of enemies of the state, where liberties are severely curtailed. But the justice system becomes more efficient. They do also sign something called the Lateran Pact with the Papacy, which is a thing where basically Mussolini reaches out to the Pope and they make an agreement with the Pope. And the Vatican is recognized as its own independent state. So, but they destroy democracy and they do other terrible things too. So, and there's also poor industrial growth at that time in Italy. So there are some limited improvements, but for the most part, fascism does not do Italy many favors, to be clear. Okay, Nazi Germany. The roots of Nazism in Germany basically come from both extreme nationalism, where the Germans viewed themselves as superior to others, and the humiliation surrounding the loss of World War I, where the Germans were eager to restore their national faith. And also racism, and this is where you get Nazism. Okay, so unlike Italy, which is mostly just about fascism and about Italian nationalism, they have less of a racial bend. I won't say no racial bend. Certainly, there's by Europeans they enjoyed a sense of European superiority to the rest of the world, no matter where you came from in Europe. But the Germans in particular have a very, very racist superiority complex surrounding the idea of the Aryan race, Aryan, the kind of stereotypically blonde hair, blue-eyed, Germanic, light-skinned, Northern European bloodline. And, of course, all of the quote-unquote science that was done surrounding the Aryan race and its superiority has since been debunked, and it's all a bunch of nonsense. But at the time, they really thought of themselves as superior to particularly Jewish people, but also Slavic people and Romani folks, who are often, previously they were referred to as gypsies, but now that's kind of considered a derogatory term, so we refer to them as Romani folks. But anyone who was not German, essentially anyone who is of darker skin than a traditional German male or female. Now, the rise of Hitler comes with the start of a very small party at first called the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or in German, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. I don't speak German, but it's something like that. After World War I, and it was a tiny group at first that met in the back of a little beer hall. But then when the economic situation in Germany starts to become more dire, with the hyperinflation scenario of the early 20s, the Nazi Party starts to gain a lot of favor. Now, one of the ways in which the Nazi Party establishes itself early on, which you guys saw in the first episode of this docuseries, is that Hitler... hey, what's up, Nico? Good to see you. Just to remind you, Nico, this is for regular world history, but you're welcome to hang in here. But I'm actually doing a world thing right now, so if you want to watch the AP Euro one, I did that one this morning at 8 a.m. But it's good to see you. And so anyhow, to talk a little bit about this, one of the ways in which Hitler in the early days rises to power is he allies himself with a kind of really super nationalist group of paramilitary dudes known as the SA, the Sturmabteilung, which is German for Storm Division. And the Storm Division was a bunch of World War I vets who had kind of been displaced. They'd kind of been humiliated from the Treaty of Versailles. They're super against the brand new government of Germany at this time called the Weimar Republic, which was this little fledgling baby bird democracy that had just gotten started in Germany at this time. And they view the Weimar Republic, this democratic institution that got set up after World War I ended, they view it as stabbing the German people in the back. They literally call it the Diktat, okay, the dictated peace, all right? In other words, the Germans thought that they didn't have a choice in the peace terms that were dictated to them by the Allied powers, the victors of World War I. And so the displaced German military, who many of them were coming home defeated, both not just on a military level, but defeated on a mental level, defeated on a physical level. Perhaps they have terrible, deformities from being shot or explosions or you name it, barbed wire, whatever it is. Okay. Or maybe they just have mental trauma from post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that. Anyhow, these folks are coming home and they feel displaced and they're angry. They're angry. They're mad that they lost the war. They're mad at their government. And mad people tend to be really vocal. And so anyhow, the Brown Shirts, the Sturmabteilung, this was a Nazi paramilitary group that Hitler allied himself with as kind of a bit of muscle to provide him some muscle for his political. He's more of a political guy. Hitler is. Now, he did fight in World War I as a low-ranking corporal, but he kind of makes friends with tougher guys than him in a way, and uses his cult of personality to keep them as kind of his personal protection for a while. But what ends up happening, like Hitler does with everyone, basically, is this private army of the party. Think of it almost like a political party with their own private military that's hired as like a muscle to show up at rallies and intimidate people. And they all wear their own little like political party uniforms to demonstrate solidarity and nationalism. Very, very fascist stuff. Okay. Well, this political paramilitary ends up getting stabbed in the back themselves by Hitler, because Hitler realizes that the leader of that little paramilitary group, his name was Ernst Röhm. R-O-H-M was his last name. Ernst Röhm. And Ernst Röhm was played by kind of that scary, creepy-looking dude who Hitler met in the gym of that first episode of the docuseries, last episode that we watched before we left for break. If you remember who I'm talking about, you may have to go back and watch it. But anyhow, that's the guy who plays Ernst Röhm in the docuseries, and he gets stabbed in the back by Hitler. In an event called the Night of Long Knives. I'll explain what that is in a little bit. Hitler had attempted, and one of the last things that you should have seen in the docuseries that we watched was the court trial that happens after Hitler attempts something called the Beer Hall Putsch. And what the Beer Hall Putsch was an attempted overthrow of the government in Munich. Now, Munich is in central southern Germany, and that's where Hitler lived at the time, in Bavaria, which was the German state, the southern German state. And Hitler failed this attempt. The Beer Hall Putsch of 1923 failed, and Hitler was sentenced to basically a one-year jail term. And this sentence was exceptionally light for someone who had literally just tried to overthrow the government. I mean, this is treason, essentially. But he does it in the name of caring more about Germany than, in his view, the German Weimar Republic did. And so he gets by because the court justices that sentence him are sympathetic to his nationalist rhetoric in the midst of huge German economic upheaval. Remember, 1923 is at the height of German hyperinflation, where if you wanted to go and buy a loaf of bread, it cost you as much as 200 billion marks or some crazy figure like that, where it's just an obscenely huge amount of money had been printed, because remember, going back to the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, the Germans had been forced to pay for the entire cost of all war reparations relating to World War I. So as a result of that, the German economy had completely collapsed by 1923 from printing so much money that the money wasn't even worth the paper it was printed on anymore. You saw kids throwing huge chunks of money into the fire to heat their homes. People, if you showed up with a wheelbarrow full of money, people would dump the money out, leave it on the sidewalk, and take your wheelbarrow, because that was the thing that had any actual value to it. So the German economy is really struggling during this time. Well, as a result of that, Hitler is able to garner favor with the judges and gets a very, very, very light sentence in a very minimum security style prison. And this allows him to write his book, Mein Kampf. Now, Mein Kampf was written in jail. It becomes the blueprint for Hitler's true future plans. And in Mein Kampf, he talks about something called Lebensraum. Now, Lebensraum is a German word, Leben, L-E-B-E-N-S-R-A-U-M. Lebensraum was a German word for living space. Living spaces. Okay, sorry. I just couldn't help myself. And so living space. And what he says is that the German population needs more room to live. That after World War I, due to the Treaty of Versailles and the German Weimar Republic not having any say in how that treaty was handled, the Germans lost territory. So Hitler said, it doesn't make sense that we have German people living outside the bounds of Germany. So, for example, there was a swath of land that France had taken back from Germany after World War I, west of Alsace-Lorraine. There was the Polish corridor, which had been opened up to Poland and took and actually divided Germany into two different territories. There were lands in Czechoslovakia that had traditionally German people living there, and so on and so forth. So Hitler basically says we need more room for German people to live, and that no German person should be living outside the physical boundaries of national Germany. So his number one goal to start is to make the German Empire whole. And the way that he's going to do this is by systematically taking back land that he perceived belonged to Germany. But then what he does is he takes that idea of Lebensraum and he extends it past traditional German-held lands into territories like Poland, and then eventually during World War II, he tries to extend that concept of Lebensraum all the way over to Eastern Europe into Russia. And so this concept of Lebensraum starts off being kind of a bring all German national people into the bounds of Germany, but then very quickly transgresses into this new fight for land in the East over territories that had never historically belonged to Germany, that Hitler became greedy and was trying to take over in the name of Lebensraum. So that's one of the things that gets laid out in Mein Kampf. Another thing, of course, is anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism is a generic term to describe anti-Jewish folks, and basically, if you're an anti-Semite, that means that you don't like Jewish people based purely on the fact that they are Jewish, and you probably have some other questionable worldviews about the role of Jewish folks in global society and so on and so forth. So anti-Semitism was quite rampant at this time, both in Germany but also in Russia, frankly, and also in America. Anti-Semitism was a thing that until after World War II really was quite prolific globally in the West, and so you saw anti-Semitism a lot in America, you saw it in Europe, you saw it in Russia, but you saw it in other places as well, in the Middle East and so on. And of course, anti-Semitism still exists today. There are still people who are anti-Semitic and don't like Jewish folks simply because they are Jewish. But I think that it's good that hopefully people have kept in touch with stories of like the Holocaust and so on, and that there are a museum of tolerance in LA and stuff that allows us to remember that Jewish folks play an important role in history and that they've been treated very unfairly in many cases over time. So this ideology of anti-Semitism is a backbone of Hitler's rhetoric, because he blames all the problems that Germany is facing at that time on Jewish people. And it was really kind of an unfair claim to make, because Jewish people only made up about 1% of the total total German population of Germany. So blaming all of Germany's ills on 1% of the population, this is a thing that we call scapegoating. And when you have a scapegoat, what you're doing is you're taking and you're putting the blame, some of which doesn't even fall on that person, and you're putting all the blame onto a particular segment of society or a particular individual or a particular entity of some sort. And in this case, all of the blame gets put onto Jewish folks, but also others, homosexuals, communists, and other people with various sorts of difficulties, like mental or physical handicaps. The fall of the Weimar Republic very much comes as a result of the Great Depression. So one of the things that I had told you about the rise of Hitler is that no one was more excited about the Great Depression than Hitler was. Okay, because the Great Depression sent a brief period of economic recovery in Germany right back into chaos again. One of the things that we talked about in the unit before we left was something called the Dawes Plan, come up with by a guy named Charles Dawes. And Charles Dawes was an American banker who said, if we lend money to Germany, Germany's economy is going to recover over time because it will be stabilized by our currency. It's almost like building scaffolding around the German economy with American income. And we did that, and it did work for a while. It started in 1924, and for about 5 years, the German economy every year started to get better and better and more stable. And during that time, Hitler's influence decreases. During the time that he's writing Mein Kampf, during the time that he's in jail for the beer hall putsch, Germany's getting better under the leadership of a guy named Gustav Stresemann. And Gustav Stresemann was pretty well liked because he was seen as running the Weimar Republic in a better direction. Gustav Stresemann, though, dies of a stroke, I think it was, in 1929. And so this is perfect timing for the stock market crash, and it's perfect timing for Hitler getting out of jail and reigniting all of the hostilities and all of the fear and terror and resentment that the Nazi Party was so good at stoking this fear in the people. And he gets that Nazi Party going again, and it's right about then that we see momentum pick up for the Nazi movement in Germany. And due to exploiting certain features of the Weimar Republic and how that the blueprint of that government was set up, he was able to systematically, and by the way, I'm setting up the video that you're going to be watching, he was able to systematically get more and more seats in the German parliament, which is called the Reichstag. So the Reichstag is like our Congress, okay? It's basically like the same as the Senate and the House of Representatives, except for it's in Germany under the Weimar Republic. And there was a rule that allowed Hitler to call these emergency votes. And every single time that he called an emergency vote was a lot of times because of emergencies that he himself created. Like, for example, he burns down the Reichstag and then blames it on the communists and calls for an emergency vote. And because everybody comes in thinking that it's the communists that burned it down, he gains a whole bunch of seats in the Reichstag with all of these emergency votes that he keeps on having. And so Hitler, when he ends up taking power in 1933, it's because he has been playing this game of chess with the powers in the government, and he's been systematically moving the pieces to set everyone up and then backstab them, and he gains power legally by exploiting channels for gaining power in the Reichstag, by gaining more and more seats. And you'll see how he does that in this upcoming episode if you decide to watch it and do the assignment associated with it. So the Great Depression is really what allows for the door to be kicked wide open by Hitler. Unemployment, by the time that the end of 1932 gets reached in Germany, the unemployment rate in Germany has reached over 40%. By comparison to America, which was 25%. Now, at the height of the recession in 2009, we don't have unemployment rates yet. It's too soon to know what the COVID virus has brought. But for the most recent, the worst the unemployment rates got back in 2009 with the last major recession that we had was about 9% or so, 9.5%. The United States unemployment rate was at 25%. That is, in the Great Depression, that is huge. That's 1 in 4 adults doesn't have a job. That is a huge amount of people. But 40-something%, to have over 40% unemployment, is a dire economic situation. It's really bad in Germany. And this is why Hitler's messages become so influential to the people, is because they're hurting. They're struggling. The German people are really economically hurting during this time. They've lost all wealth. Any retirement package, gone. All jobs, gone. I mean, they are looking for a savior. And the economic situation and the dire consequences of the crash of the stock market and the failure of the Great Depression have led the German people to want a person to come in and save the day for them. And this is Hitler knows this. He's not an idiot, and he uses everything at his disposal. Film, radio, posters, advertising, while at the same time gaining a whole bunch of maniacal followers, okay? and using these top-ranking Nazi officials, guys like, for example, you're going to learn about a guy called Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels was the propaganda minister of Hitler, and Joseph Goebbels utilized all of these different media in the time. We think of social media today as being things like Instagram, Facebook. They didn't have the internet in those days, but they did have phone systems, and they had radio, and they had film, and so on, and they used these different forms of media to get the Nazi message out there, while at the same time demonizing all sorts of different kinds of people for the burden that they're putting on the state, that the German people are having to take care of all of these burdens, like people who have mental or physical handicaps, or that the German people are constantly fighting all of these imagined battles against Jewish folks or against communists or against whoever else inside the state. This is people just get beat over the head with this Nazi message day in, day out, and it causes more and more and more people to start thinking to themselves, hey, maybe there's something to it. Because, not everybody's a political genius. A lot of the folks in Germany at this time are just working class people. They don't have college educations in political science. It's the 1940s. Okay, most people don't even go to college in those days. And so 1930s, 1940s in Germany, you have a whole lot of people who are out of work. They're fallen on desperate times. They've maybe worked their whole life, particularly older populations. They may have worked their whole life. They see their whole retirement plan as worthless now. The German economy is a wreck. People are hungry. And times are getting tough, and they want somebody to come in and say, look, I can fix this for you as long as we do X, Y, Z things. And Hitler uses that to his advantage. So this is where we see the rise of Hitler, is in the early 1930s. The Nazis won the largest percentage of votes in the Reichstag in the 1933 elections. Now, they don't have a simple majority. They don't make up over 50%. That's not the kind of majority that I'm thinking about. They only have about 33% of the Reichstag, but that's more than anyone else has in the Reichstag. So although they are the majority party, they're majority party compared to several other parties who split smaller percentages between them. And so that's how that works. So Hitler became chancellor on January 30th, 1933, and he was actually appointed by Paul von Hindenburg. Now, if you recognize that name Hindenburg, it's because Hindenburg was a top general in World War I. Now, in an alternate reality, anyone who was a top general like Ludendorff or Hindenburg in World War I would have been completely discredited after the war, and their political careers and military careers would have been over because the Germans lost World War I. But due to the economic situation of the time, and by the way, I want to mention to you, Hindenburg hated Hitler. But Hindenburg is getting to a particular age by this point. He's very old. He's in his 80s by this point. He's also kind of having problems with senility, like just dementia. He's not thinking quite right. His memory isn't quite right. But he absolutely loathes Hitler because he views Hitler from the military standpoint as being very low ranking. Hindenburg was a general, right? Hitler was just a lowly corporal, so he's got a military bias against him. But he also doesn't like Hitler because he views Hitler as just this backstabby weasel and a guy of very low moral integrity. And even though he may have a lot of fanaticism and a lot of support, Hindenburg isn't super compelled by Hitler, but Hindenburg gets himself into a position where he doesn't have much of a choice. And that's largely what this episode is all about. You're going to see Hindenburg portrayed in this second episode here of what goes on. I told you about the Reichstag fire of 1933. As soon as Hitler gains power, one of the first things that he starts doing is passing laws to curtail the rights of individuals in Germany. He tries immediately to set up an authoritarian, totalitarian style state where he starts chipping away at the rights of, for example, particularly Jewish folks and Romani folks in Germany, where they now no longer can marry German people. Jewish people are not allowed to employ German people. And all sorts of different kinds of rules surrounding what Jewish folks can and cannot do, and segmenting them. When you ask yourself the question, how do we get to the Holocaust in the early 40s? how does the Holocaust happen? And by Holocaust, I mean like the final solution. Like, how do we get to death camps like Auschwitz and Dachau? How do we get there? It's not overnight. It's a systematic brainwashing of society, where they are releasing evil propaganda that over time changes the minds of the people, and they institute laws over time that systematically take more and more rights away. So at first people say, oh, well, you can't name your kid Jewish names. Now, it's not seemingly like not that big of a deal. Oh, you just can't name your kids certain Jewish names. That's not that big of a deal, right? And then the next step is, oh, well, now you can't marry Jewish people. Oh, well, that's a little bit more intrusive. Oh, well, now the next step is the Nuremberg laws create all of these sorts of things where, they can't go to the same schools anymore, and they can't live in the same neighborhoods anymore. And it's a slippery slope. And what ends up happening over time is that more and more and more rights get taken away from these people. And before long now, people are convinced that they actually do have an enemy living within their own state. And so people start doing things like burning down places of worship or Jewish homes and businesses and breaking into them and looting them and things like that. And that's what we see happen with something called Kristallnacht. So within 5 years of Hitler taking power, it's not overnight, but 5 years down the line, now people actually do believe that they have an enemy. And Kristallnacht happens in, I think it's November of 1938, and boom, now we've got blatantly bad things going on, crimes against Jewish homes and businesses and places of worship and so on, that are a product of these laws that Hitler started to pass systematically to take away their rights and make them second-rate citizens. Joseph Goebbels was the propaganda minister. I told you about him. One of the things that they did was they made a movie in 1934 called The Triumph of the Will. This was a German propaganda Nazi propaganda movie that utilized brand new filmmaking techniques that had never been seen before. And Hitler was using this film. It was a really, really, really well-known film. Hitler used this film, once again, as a form of new style of propaganda to convince people just how amazing the Nazi Party was, and how the Nazi Party was the German people's only solution for solving the problems that Germany was facing economically at that time. The Night of Long Knives, I promised I would come back to that. In June of 1934, I told you that the Nazis, and you're going to see this in the episode today as well, the Night of Long Knives happens. This is where Hitler backstabs the Sturmabteilung, the SA. This was the organization headed by Ernst Röhm that you saw. He was that military leader who had all of his men, militiamen supporting the Nazis. And Hitler stabs him in the back in something called the Night of Long Knives. And basically, Hitler gets warned that a lot of big businesses, this is kind of complex to explain. You have a German military at the time. That's not who I'm talking about. The German military at the time is a limited force after World War I because they weren't allowed to have more than, I think, 100,000 people or something like that. So you have a limited German military. There's a limited German army, but that's run by the government. But remember, Hitler is the chancellor of the government at that time. So when Hitler takes power and makes himself the totalitarian leader of Germany, he has control of the German military, which is known as the Wehrmacht, which is spelled Wehrmacht, Wehrmacht, okay? He has control of the German military forces, which he starts to build up against the wishes of the Treaty of Versailles at this time. That's one thing he has control over. But he also has control over the paramilitary of the Nazi Party, which at this point was something called the Sturmabteilung. But the Sturmabteilung was kind of an organization that Hitler had made friends with, and he controls because he's the leader of the party, and the Sturmabteilung are Nazis, but they are also headed by their own individual leader of the Sturmabteilung, and his name was Ernst Röhm. And Hitler, being a totalitarian guy, says, I don't want Ernst Röhm thinking that he can take the SA and have them operate against me. So he basically stabs Ernst Röhm in the back to please the conservatives and the big businesses and the German military at the time, which is the other major military organization that he controls. And the way that he pleases them is by saying, I'm going to completely undermine and dismantle the Sturmabteilung, Night of Long Knives. They basically overnight completely arrest and shoot without trial about 1,000 Sturmabteilung leaders and other political enemies. This is a purge. Once again, this is using that term purge to describe getting rid of political rivals or potential political rivals. And it's very duplicitous. It's very backstabbing, okay? Night of Long Knives. And at that point, Hitler has a personal protection guard known as the SS, called the Schutzstaffel. And the Schutzstaffel is the paramilitary of the Nazi Party there on out. It's the personal special protection forces of the high political command of the Nazi Party. Hitler's personal military is the SS. So the difference in World War II, this is important for down the line when we get to World War II eventually. The importance for down the line is that the Schutzstaffel is going to be the party military. That's the Nazi Party military. Those are the guys at concentration camps. Those are the guys at Nazi headquarters. Those are the guys in the political realm of things. You also have the German Wehrmacht, the military. Now, there is some overlap between them. Sometimes you have what was called the Waffen-SS, Waffenss. The Waffen-SS were the ones who actually, they did use SS in fighting military fronts sometimes. However, for the most part, the people who were utilized in actually fighting World War II wasn't the SS. It was the German Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, the German military, which is controlled by the state. That's a state apparatus, not a party apparatus. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, aren't the state and the party one and the same? Well, yes, they are both controlled by Hitler at this point, but technically they are of two different kind of separate wings under Hitler's control, if that makes any sense to you. That's the easiest way of describing it. And of course, within the German military, you also have something called the Luftwaffe, Luftwaffe, Luftwaffe. And the Luftwaffe was the German Air Force. I'll talk about these terms again at a different time. But the SS joins with the political police, the Gestapo. There's also the secret police, the Gestapo at this time. So the SS and the Gestapo are, again, kind of two different organizations within the party. So you have the party, which is the Nazi Party, and then you have the military of the Nazi Party, which is the SS, the militia, rather, of the Nazi Party, and then you have the secret police of the Nazi Party, which is the Gestapo, and they kind of work together with one another. All right, and all of the SS is led by basically Hitler's right-hand man, and his name is Heinrich Himmler. He's one of the most fanatic anti-Semites of the Nazi Party. He is extremely anti-Jewish. He's one of the architects of the final solution of the gas chambers, and so on. So the Night of Long Knives is where they completely do away with the Sturmabteilung, the SA, and it is dismantled. Okay, Hitler Youth, we've talked about that. Kristallnacht, we talked about that. That was Night of Broken Glass. That was where Hitler ordered an attack on Jewish homes and businesses, communities across the countryside, and it was a well-organized wave of violence that destroyed the homes, synagogues, and businesses of Jewish folks. Thousands of Jewish folks were also arrested during the Kristallnacht event and made to pay for the damages that were done against them. And then, of course, you have the start of the Holocaust, starting after that, where it starts off in World War II as known as the Holocaust by way of bullets, the Einsatzgruppen battalions, where the SS divisions would go and round up Jewish people after the war started and just shoot them and bury them in mass graves. And then eventually, due to various things happening, they end up changing that program to being the concentration camps and death camps. Okay, anything else that I need to address before we move on to bigger and better things? let's see here. Results of Nazi economic. Okay, so a couple of results of Nazi rule in Germany during the 30s. Unemployment drops from 6 million in January of 1933. Remember, I told you that the population of the unemployment rate at this time of the population was about 40 something percent, 43%, I think. Unemployment drops by 5/6. So they go from 6 million people unemployed in Germany to only 1 million people unemployed in just 3 years. So one of the things that the Nazi Party does do of note for the German people at the time was that they start to put people back to work. And by 1938, you actually had a shortage of workers. So women started entering into jobs in the workforce, which was actually previously denied because Nazis, because they're so conservative, they have very traditional views on gender roles. And so women actually suffered under the Nazis, not having as many rights and privileges and opportunities as they once did. But when there becomes a job shortage and they actually need more people working, they start accepting women into traditionally male roles at that time. By 1938, the standard of living for the average employed worker increased moderately. Profits of businesses in Germany rose sharply. A lot of this had to do with militarism, so a lot of the industries that they were doing were about military buildup. They're starting to make uniforms, they're starting to make weapons, they're starting to improve things like planes and do things. Ferdinand Porsche, famously the car Porsches. Okay, Porsche was invented by a German automobile maker under the Nazis called Ferdinand Porsche. Volkswagen and Porsche and Audi are all subsidiaries of Volkswagen, which was invented by the Nazis back in World War, or in the pre-World War II era. Well-educated society classes have the most advantage. They possess the biggest advantages in society in Nazi Germany at that time. Like fascist Italy, women are pretty much just viewed as housewives and mothers until they have to go to work at that time. And then, of course, as far as the youth go, they're expected to join the Hitler Youth. And so Nazis start indoctrinating German kids, particularly German boys, to become devout Nazis. So that by the time that these boys, who were about 10 in 1933, become adults in 1939, they are the diehard Nazi radicals fighting for their nation in World War II. Okay, so for today's assignment, that brings us through what I wanted to. What I wanted to review today. For today's assignment, I'm going to be putting a new folder onto Schoology that will say distance learning lessons or whatever. And inside that folder, you will find a link to the YouTube video, the second episode of the YouTube video that I'd like you guys to watch by Wednesday. And then the assignment for that we started is actually still on Schoology, going back to before the time that we left after the COVID break. And so that is still available for you on there. I will be putting a submission thing inside the distance instruction folder as well. And I will be putting a link to this lecture inside that distance folder in case you want to go back and watch it again. So be looking out for a pink folder in Schoology that says new distance learning lessons. And each folder inside that will be its own individual micro lesson. Now, when you do the assignment, please have it done by 10 a.m. on Wednesday and submit it on Schoology. I will not be accepting late work for any online instruction. So you either do it or you don't do it. Can you put up the first video too? Sure, I'll put up the first one for you, Cushy. Why not? I don't mind doing that at all. I'll put the first and second video up for you in case you want to watch the first one again, which you're more than welcome to do. It'll cover some of the same things that we talked about in class today. I think it goes along pretty well. Remember, it's not perfect, okay? It was like a Canadian TV miniseries or something like that. So it's far from being perfect, and it's a little bit dated now because it was from like 2003 or something like that. But yeah, I'll put both videos up there for you in the same folder, and then go ahead and have that done by Wednesday. Now, if you don't do it, it's not going to hurt you, but if you do it, that'll be the first 5 points towards reconciling some of your guys' grades in the class, and it could help you out. Remember, everything that you do helps a little bit more. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and it'll just jump up every single week. with every assignment that you submit. If you don't do it by the time that we come back on Wednesday at 10 a.m., hey, you know what? Just do the next one. There will be no late work. I'm not going to mess with late work anymore. I'm tired of it. I just cannot do it anymore. You have no idea how much that tortures my existence. So work is, from this point on, it's either going to be submitted by the time I grade it, and if it's not going to get added. And your grade will never go down. It'll only go up with everything that you do. So that is how that's going to go. And if you have any questions, I want to remind you that I'm always available on Schoology. I view these as our office hours, if you will. So anytime that you have questions, the assignment is on the questions on episode 2. There were questions on episode 1, but because we already did episode 1, I am assuming that you did those questions already. So Josh, to answer your question, there will be assignments on there from the first episode, but presumably you already answered those. All right, and then let me see. I was going to say something else, but I lost my train of thought. I consider this our office hours. I am always available through Schoology or through email. I'll probably get back to you faster if you message me on Schoology because it pops up on my phone. So if you want to message me on Schoology about any concerns, please do so. If you don't have any questions, that's great too. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to tune in today. I really appreciate it. I know we only got about a third of the class in here. I did send out a mass email last night. I also sent out a reminder on Schoology last week or a reminder on Schoology, an update on Schoology. Please be checking Schoology frequently. If you want, download the app and make sure notifications are turned on your phone. I'll be putting all that stuff up on Schoology right now for you for today's lesson. And so be looking out for that within the next 5 minutes or so. And thanks so much for tuning in, guys. And that'll do it for today's first lecture back. All right. Have a great day.